When a woman truly withdraws, not as a strategy, not as a game, but from a place of final clarity, a man is met with a kind of silence he has never known before. It is not the silence of punishment, nor the silence that begs to be broken. It is the silence of finality. It echoes not through his ears, but through the walls of his comfort. It hits him in places he didn't know were exposed. You see, men often operate in a psychological framework where presence is assumed and taken for granted. They measure connection not by emotion, but by predictability. As long as you're there, texting, explaining, hoping, reacting, he feels in control, even if he never says it aloud. He believes he holds the emotional upper hand because your energy still flows toward him. But the moment you disconnect for real, a crack appears in his illusion. He senses something is missing, but it's not just your words. It's your essence. That unspoken pull, that invisible thread that once tied him to validation, praise, concern, or even conflict suddenly snaps. And for the first time, he is forced to sit in a space without your energy reinforcing his image of power. The withdrawal becomes louder than your presence ever was. It's a silence that doesn't chase, doesn't remind, and doesn't fill in the gaps. And that silence dismantles the illusion of control he built so confidently. A man may not know exactly what is shifting at first. He may mislabel it as freedom. He might even feel a temporary sense of relief. But that feeling is shallow, because the absence of pressure is not the same as peace. Soon the mental noise begins. He starts wondering where you went, not just physically, but energetically. He may still see your name in his phone, but there's no emotional charge behind it anymore. He may scroll through your pictures, but they don't respond to him like they used to. He realizes that something has shifted in you, and that shift is irreversible. You didn't just stop talking, you stopped needing him. That's when the void opens up. The void of control, the void where his predictable reactions used to play out, the void where he used to feel superior, needed, chased, forgiven, or even tolerated. Now, that space is empty, and it forces him to face a hard truth. Your connection was not built on equal footing. It was built on your effort. And without it, the structure collapses. He may try to reach for you, but now his hand comes back empty. His words don't hit like they used to. His late-night texts or passive apologies feel hollow. They're met with silence, or worse, indifference. He realizes he is no longer the center of your emotional orbit. That truth hits him in his pride first, then his heart. It's not rejection he fears. It's irrelevance. And your withdrawal speaks that language fluently. You see, real withdrawal isn't dramatic. It doesn't slam the door or throw accusations. It simply walks away and closes the chapter without explanation. And in doing so, it reveals everything. It shows him how much he relied on your emotional labor without returning it. It shows him that while he thought he had you on a string, it was really you holding space for his growth, waiting, hoping, believing he would rise to the occasion. Now that space is gone, that belief is gone, that version of you, the one who gave, who explained, who cared, even when she was tired, is gone. And what remains is the truth of who he is without you, uncertain, exposed, and deeply uncomfortable, not because you were his everything, but because you were the mirror he refused to look into. The withdrawal becomes a reset. Not just for you, but for him. And it forces him to confront the very things he tried to ignore. The fact that your presence was never guaranteed. The fact that love isn't owed. It's earned. The fact that no matter how many times you came back before, this time feels different, because it is. You stop needing him to change. You stop believing that if you just explained it one more time, he would understand. You stopped waiting for him to rise. And in that stillness, in that real detachment, a man is left face to face with his own emotional limits. He may not cry. He may not even speak of it, but he will feel it in the mornings when he checks his phone and finds nothing. In the quiet moments when his mind searches for yours, but meets only the echo of what once was. In the realization that he is no longer your priority, your concern, or your responsibility. He is left to sit with his own energy now, without yours there to soften the edges. And in that space, the illusion of control dies quietly. Because control only works when someone else is still playing the game. You, however, have left the board entirely. A man rarely recognizes true value in the moment. It's often hidden beneath his expectations, veiled by familiarity and buried under the illusion that what is constant will remain constant. When you were present, emotionally available, consistently forgiving, open with your energy, he may have acknowledged your care with passing words, vague appreciation, or distracted affection, but he didn't fully feel the weight of your value. That awareness only arrives in the silence that follows your real withdrawal. When you stop explaining yourself, when you no longer wait for him to change, when you no longer remind him of how much you give, that's when the mirror turns toward him, and what it reflects is jarring. He begins to understand, not intellectually, but emotionally, what your presence actually meant. It wasn't just the text or the time, it was the unseen emotional labor, the steady comfort of knowing someone believed in him, rooted for him, held space for him even when he didn't deserve it. That value, which once felt like background music to his life, suddenly vanishes, and in its absence, he begins to feel the coldness that presence once protected him from. He doesn't immediately call it loss. At first, it might show up as confusion, an ache, a restlessness he can't name. He might even try to distract himself with noise, with people, with temporary attention, but none of it replaces the internal shift your absence created. Because your withdrawal isn't a simple change of behavior. It's a shift in energetic frequency. He starts to feel the weight of what he no longer has access to. The kind of weight that can't be touched or seen, but only felt when it's missing. He may try to trace it back, wondering when things started to fade, but by the time he's asking himself that, you've already let go. You've stopped needing to be seen by someone who only looks when it's too late. Your love, once a quiet force always available to him, is now a sealed door. And it's in front of that door that he begins to recognize just how much it once meant. He remembers the way you used to care about the small things, the way you checked in even on his silence, the way you understood his moods without him having to explain. He starts recalling the way your presence made him feel grounded, even though he never admitted it. The reality of value hits hardest when it can no longer be taken for granted. When he finally sits in that space alone, with nothing to distract from the truth, he realizes that what he lost wasn't just a person, it was a sanctuary. A sense of being emotionally held without conditions. This realization doesn't come with fireworks or loud awakenings. It arrives subtly in the pauses of his day, in the moments where he instinctively reaches out but stops because he knows you've changed. It's in the messages he types but deletes, the late night thoughts he wants to share but has no safe place to land them anymore. And each of those moments builds a deeper understanding of what your presence actually meant. He no longer sees you as someone who was just there. Now he knows you were the one who made his emotional world make sense. And now that you're gone, the pieces no longer fit. The beauty of your withdrawal is that it didn't seek to punish, it was born from clarity. A recognition that your energy was being poured into a space that refused to honor it. And when you stopped trying, stopped hoping, stopped waiting, your absence began teaching him everything your words never could. It taught him about your consistency, your patience, your nurturing. It revealed the invisible weight you carried for both of you. While he assumed you were simply emotional, it uncovered how much of his peace came from your presence, even when he refused to admit he needed you. Now he's left to feel it all, not because you wanted revenge, but because value, when unappreciated, does not stay. And once it leaves a silence that speaks louder than any confrontation. He might not chase you right away. He might sit in pride, in resistance, in confusion. But deep within, the lesson begins to root. The lesson that love is not owed, presence is not permanent, and energy withdrawn from the soul is the loudest teacher of all. He may try to move on. He may try to replace the void with someone new. But what you gave wasn't just attention. It was alignment. It was depth. It was spiritual presence. And when that kind of value exits a man's life, it cannot be replicated with surface level replacements. Because now he knows the difference. Now he understands that not all affection is equal. Now he realizes that the woman he thought would always be there was the one he should have been building a future with. Not because she begged, not because she cried, but because she eventually stopped doing both. And in that stopping, her value became undeniable. When a woman withdraws fully, without bitterness, without explanation, without drama, it does something inside a man that no confrontation ever could. It doesn't just remove her presence. It dismantles a carefully built inner identity he wasn't even aware existed. Because up until that point, he lived in a comfortable duality. One part ego, one part heart. The ego told him he had time, that she would stay, that her love was a certainty. That no matter what he said or didn't say, did or didn't do, she would still show up. The ego clung to control, to predictability, to dominance over the emotional rhythm of the relationship. It whispered things like, she's emotional, she overthinks, she'll calm down, and she won't really leave. But when she actually leaves, not out of anger, but out of self-respect, the ego begins to panic. Because what was once predictable is no longer dependable. What was once available is now unreachable. The familiar emotional pattern, the arguments, the explanations, the reconciliations no longer repeats. And in that break from the cycle, the man is forced to face the part of himself he kept hidden, even from himself. The vulnerable, unprepared, emotionally underdeveloped part. That's when the inner war begins. His ego still insists she'll come back, but his heart quietly says, this time it's different. That internal conflict creates emotional dissonance. He may even lash out, not at her, but at his surroundings. Getting irritated, becoming distant, withdrawing from people, drowning in distraction because he doesn't know how to deal with the split within him. His ego wants to maintain pride, wants to uphold the illusion that he's unfazed. But the heart, whether he admits it or not, is starting to feel the absence. Not just the physical absence of her body, but the deeper void where her love once lived. Love that was steady, patient, forgiving, and rooted in something real. This emotional tug of war intensifies when he sees that she hasn't just gone silent. She's changed. She's not pretending, she's not waiting, she's not posting to get his attention or reaching out to trigger him. She has let go. And that is terrifying because it means the emotional power he thought he had was never real. It was borrowed. It was allowed. And now it's gone. That's when the fear creeps in. Not the kind of fear that rushes to fix things, but the quiet fear that whispers, what if I pushed her too far? What if I broke something that can't be repaired? This fear doesn't shout. It simmers. It lingers in the background of his daily life. He might still show up to work, still go out with friends, still post his regular routines, but underneath it all, he's unsettled. His ego can't fully relax because his heart keeps nudging him, pulling at him, reminding him of how deeply her love ran. And now with it gone, he realizes he can't just fill that space with someone new. He can't unfeel what he's begun to notice. The truth is, he took her presence for granted, not out of cruelty, but out of blindness. Men are taught to measure loss through visible absence, but emotional absence, that takes time to register. It creeps in through the spaces that used to feel warm, in the way his phone feels emptier now, in the lack of emotional safety he never even knew she was providing. His ego tells him to be strong, to move on, to not let her see his weakness, but the heart wants to reach out. The heart wants to speak. The heart wants to ask, are you really done? But the ego censors it. And this back and forth becomes exhausting. Eventually, he reaches a point where he begins to question himself in ways he never has before. He starts wondering if he's emotionally stunted, if he failed to appreciate what was in front of him, if maybe, just maybe, he doesn't really understand love the way he thought he did. Your withdrawal has triggered something bigger than heartbreak. It's called accountability. And accountability isn't loud. It doesn't come with tears or rage. It comes in moments of stillness. In those nights when he lies awake wondering why her energy won't leave his thoughts. The ego will try to fight it for as long as it can. It will mock the memory. It will seek out temporary distractions. It will even convince him that he's over it. But deep down, the conflict remains. Because your absence wasn't about games. It was about evolution. You grew past the version of yourself that tolerated breadcrumbs. And now he must face the version of himself that thought that was enough. That's the real conflict. Not just between his ego and his heart, but between who he was with you and who he must now become without you. There comes a moment in a man's life when he realizes he can no longer project his emotional limitations onto someone else. And that moment often arrives in the stillness after a woman truly walks away. When she was present, when she still believed, when she tried to make him understand what she needed. He had the luxury of ignoring his own emotional shortcomings. Her love filled the gaps. Her compassion covered the wounds. Her consistency provided the illusion that things were fine. But when she detaches, genuinely, completely, he is left alone with the raw truth of himself. That truth doesn't flatter him. It doesn't confirm his pride. It reflects back the reality he didn't want to face. He was emotionally unavailable, underdeveloped, and entitled to a love he didn't know how to reciprocate. Your presence used to be his escape from having to grow emotionally. You made it easy for him to stay in denial. Every time you forgave, every time you explained, every time you overextended yourself to make things work, He told himself, consciously or not, that he was enough just as he was. You were the buffer between him and his emotional responsibility. But the moment you removed yourself from that position, the mirror was no longer foggy. He began to see the parts of himself that were never forced to evolve, because you were doing the emotional lifting for both of you. And that realization doesn't feel like guilt at first. It feels like discomfort, like irritation, like confusion. It eats at him slowly, showing up in the places where your presence used to bring ease. He doesn't know how to sit with himself because he was never required to. While you were around, he didn't need to build emotional depth. You offered yours freely. He didn't have to learn how to communicate his feelings. You were always trying to understand him. He never had to be vulnerable. Your patience did the work for him. And now, without that emotional net, he begins to flail. Not in public, not in front of friends, but privately, in those silent moments when the weight of who he truly is can no longer be ignored. He begins to see himself not as the man he pretended to be, but as the man who could not hold onto a woman who gave everything. And this exposure is not comfortable. It burns. Because it's one thing to lose someone. It's another to realize you never deserved them in the first place. Not because you're unworthy as a human, but because you refuse to grow. Your withdrawal highlights all the ways he stayed stagnant while you evolved. It throws a spotlight on his emotional laziness, his reliance on your love to make him feel whole, his refusal to meet you where you were because he never thought you'd leave. Now that you're gone, he's left to confront a kind of emptiness he can't name, because it isn't about you, it's about him. His own inadequacies, his failure to rise, his refusal to change when it mattered most. We might look at old messages, trying to find where things started falling apart. He might scroll through photos or memories, not out of longing, but out of regret. Because he knows deep down that you didn't just walk away. You waited. You fought. You held on longer than most. And he squandered that. He mistook your love for tolerance. He mistook your grace for weakness. And now that you've stopped carrying the emotional burden, he feels the full weight of his own immaturity. It is not something he can drink away, party away, or distract himself from. Because you weren't a temporary fix. You were the opportunity to become a better man, and he let it slip away. The hardest part for him is realizing that there's no quick fix. He can't win you back with flowers or empty words. He can't charm his way back into your heart. This isn't about apologies anymore. This is about transformation. And he knows deep down that he hasn't earned a second chance. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because love isn't enough when one person is doing all the emotional work. And for the first time, he sees that. Not because you told him, but because you stopped telling him. Your silence taught what your words never could. And now he must sit with himself, with a version of him that was never enough for a woman who gave everything she had. This is where the internal fracture begins. One part of him wants to dismiss you, pretend you were just too sensitive or wanted too much. That's the voice of denial trying to protect his ego. But another part, the quieter part, the wiser part, knows the truth. You were his mirror. You reflected both his potential and his refusal to reach for it. And now that you're gone, he's left staring at himself without distraction, without validation, without the illusion that he was emotionally capable. What remains is not pain alone. It is awakening. The kind of awakening that comes when a man must finally face the truth of who he's been and realize that unless he evolves, he will continue to destroy the very love he claims to want. Real detachment is not loud. It doesn't come with slamming doors, dramatic farewells, or a storm of emotional breakdowns. It comes quietly, like a tide that slowly stops, returning to the shore. It's not the absence of presence, it's the absence of effort. When a woman withdraws for real, what a man experiences is not just space, it's a shift in frequency. It's not that she stopped talking, it's that she stopped vibrating for him. She stopped orbiting around his moods, his needs, his excuses, and that subtle shift sends a ripple through everything he once assumed was solid. He doesn't always recognize it right away. In fact, it often takes him some time to notice that the world has changed. Not in appearance, but in temperature. Something is colder, quieter, more still, but it's not peaceful. It's haunting. You see, when a woman is still emotionally involved, she reacts, she argues, she cries, she gets upset, she checks in, she explains, she questions herself. And in those actions, even when they're heavy or filled with conflict, she is still present, still giving, still engaged. But when she detaches for real, all of that vanishes. The word stop, the need to defend herself fades. The desire to be understood disappears. That silence is not passive, it is powerful. It's the kind of quiet that isn't asking for attention, it's confirming that attention is no longer needed. And for a man who's grown used to the noise of her emotions, the silence is not just confusing, it's disturbing. That stillness starts to speak in ways he never expected. It doesn't scream, "I'm hurt." It whispers, "I've healed." Not because she stopped feeling, but because she finally started choosing herself. That ripple effect begins with subtle moments. She no longer replies immediately. She no longer checks his page. She no longer shows up in the places he expects her to be. She no longer reminds him of the love she once gave so freely. It's not out of bitterness. It's out of clarity. Her energy, once entangled with his, has been released. And what he feels is not just the loss of her, it's the collapse of the role she used to play in his life. The withdrawal reveals how much space she actually took up. Not in a burdensome way, but in a foundational one. She was the emotional compass, the nurturing voice, the one who grounded the connection even when it felt like it was falling apart. He may not have noticed that while she was doing it. He may have assumed that was just her nature, something she'd always offer, no matter how he behaved. But now that it's gone, the imbalance becomes glaring. There's no more emotional glue holding things together. No more checking in when he disappears. No more decoding his mixed signals. No more standing in the gap for both of them. He begins to feel this not just in the relationship, but in himself. He starts to notice how quiet his world has become, not externally, but internally. There's a weight he can't place, a kind of tension in the chest that doesn't go away. It's the discomfort of being left with only his own energy. Your energy, which once made him feel seen, stable, desired, now belongs to you again. And without it, he is no longer the man he thought he was. The illusion begins to unravel. Because while he once believed he held the power, it's now clear that the connection survived because of your emotional investment. He might try to reach out, test the waters, throw a breadcrumb, check to see if there's still a reaction. But when there's no reaction, when he feels the detachment in your tone or the absence of urgency in your responses, it unsettles him. Not because he wants you back instantly, but because he realizes you've outgrown the role he once placed you in. And he hasn't evolved to meet the version of you that no longer tolerates his immaturity. The ripple of your detachment spreads beyond just the connection. It touches his self-perception. He begins to see that he's not the emotionally capable man he convinced himself he was. Because now, without your energy propping up his ego, he feels small, incomplete. Not because you completed him, but because you mirrored to him what real emotional connection looked like. The hardest part is that this realization doesn't come with closure. Because real detachment doesn't give closure, it becomes it. She no longer needs to explain, argue, or seek understanding. She simply steps away. And that step, quiet as it may be, echoes louder than any confrontation. It sends a ripple through his identity, his pride, his perception of control. It forces him to face the fact that your presence wasn't just love. It was a gift he assumed would never expire, a gift he never truly opened until it was no longer available. Now, in the absence of your nurturing, your insight, your commitment, he is left to hold only what he brought to the table. And for the first time, he sees how little that was. When a woman truly withdraws, not as a manipulation, not as a moment of anger, but as a decision rooted in self-worth, she unknowingly sets into motion a quiet test. A spiritual dividing line forms between who he was with her and who he will now become without her. It's not a test she controls. It's not even something she expects to monitor. It just happens. Her absence becomes a mirror, a magnifier, and a measure of his emotional evolution. A man either begins to awaken in that absence, or he regresses deeper into the very patterns that pushed her away. There is no middle ground. The energy has shifted, and with it, the story must shift too, or end altogether. In the beginning, he may try to carry on as if nothing changed. He may double down on pride, pretend indifference, continue moving in the same emotional habits that numbed him before. But as time passes, something uncomfortable begins to stir. The silence she left behind doesn't feel like victory, it feels like a void. The things he once found solace in, distractions, temporary validation, ego games, now feel thin. His usual defenses no longer protect him from what's stirring beneath the surface. That's the sign that a choice is forming. And though he might not recognize it clearly, his soul knows. He's either going to face the emotional truths he's avoided, or he's going to build higher walls to keep those truths out. If he begins to awaken, it doesn't always look like immediate action. Awakening often starts in discomfort. He becomes more self-aware, more reflective. He replays conversations in his head, not to blame her, but to see where he was absent, where he was emotionally closed, where he withheld what could have changed everything. Regret becomes a heavy companion. But unlike guilt, which only punishes, regret has the power to humble. He begins to understand that her leaving was not betrayal. It was the consequence, a mirror of his own refusal to rise, to communicate, to meet her at the depth she always invited him to. And in that understanding, he begins to ask the questions he never asked before. What kind of man was I? What kind of man do I want to become? If he chooses to regress, however, the opposite happens. He resents her growth. He mocks her boundaries. He talks to others about how she changed, not realizing that her change was simply her healing. He seeks quick replacements, hoping someone else will fill the space she left. But no matter how many bodies or conversations he surrounds himself with, they all feel temporary, shallow, because what he's really trying to replace wasn't her physical presence. It was the emotional mirror she provided. She made him feel seen, capable, deeply connected. And now, without her, he's forced to confront the hollowness of his own emotional foundation. Regression isn't loud either. It looks like denial, distraction, overcompensation. But beneath it all is the same ache, the ache of a man who was handed something real and didn't know how to hold it. Whether he awakens or regresses, the key difference is whether he allows the pain of her absence to teach him. For the man who chooses awakening, he begins to rebuild. Not for her, not to win her back, but because he realizes what was missing wasn't just her. It was him, the real him. The man buried under pride, fear, and emotional immaturity. Her withdrawal acted like a spiritual fire, burning down the illusions he lived in for so long. And from that fire, something new begins to form. He begins to own his past. He begins to seek growth. He stops blaming and starts taking accountability, not just for what happened between them, but for how he's shown up in every area of his life. For the man who regresses, though, the story is different. He resists the fire. He hides from the mirror. He tells himself she was too much, too emotional, too demanding. And in doing so, he guarantees that the next woman will experience the same version of him. He carries the same wounds, projects the same limitations, repeats the same patterns, never realizing that healing was never her responsibility in the first place. He'll look back on her not as the one who got away, but as the one who exposed him. And that exposure, if left unattended, turns into bitterness, not just toward her, but toward himself. A quiet war between the man he could have become and the man he chose to remain. Your withdrawal, in the end, becomes a threshold, a spiritual invitation. It doesn't beg, it doesn't push, it simply is. And from that stillness, the man must decide, will he awaken and rise into the version of himself who is finally emotionally available, conscious, aware? Or will he fall back into the comfort of his old identity, where he never had to change, never had to grow, never had to feel deeply? It is his choice now. And that choice, whether visible or hidden, will shape not just how he remembers you, but how he carries himself in every relationship that follows.